while we all are looking for, of course, the highest salary possible, we all want that. It is making sure that that lifestyle matches what they're offering.
You're a chef and you're thinking about how to venture into the private chef space, how to set yourself up for success from resume to first interactions with your clients, as well as succeeding at the job. Our one-on-one coaching got you covered. Go to www.privatechef.cc and connect with me. Decades of experience can be your support to seize the next private chef opportunity. Welcome to the Private Chef Podcast, serving the 1%. I'm your host, Hennche, and on our show we speak to the best chefs, how they honed in on their skills to excel in the industry, and what it takes to work as a private chef for some of the most exclusive clients in the world. Welcome back to the Private Chef Podcast. I'm your host, Hennche. Today we are joined by Carmen Garcia, with over 15 years of experience in the staffing industry. She later founded her own recruitment company called Hudson Staffing. Join me today to learn more about Carmen's exciting career journey, the nuances of private service, industry trends, and the dynamics of recruiting private staff. Carmen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show with us today. Thank you for joining us. So welcome to the show, Carmen.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you today.
And why I wanted to speak to you, just so everybody has some context, is really your latest post about reiterating the standard of Hudson Staffing, which is your agency. And I think this would be something really valuable for the chef world to speak about, is like, where do these standards come from? And I will just quickly read them out. So you must meet the following requirements: having 5 years of experience in the role you're applying for, must be able to provide verbal references from the last 3 employers, must meet us in person. I love that one.
Okay.
Must have 2 recruiter interviews. So maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, and I think the first one, which is what we were speaking about, is the reference checking. I think that has become a big topic of conversation with agencies, with candidates. A lot of people ask us to hold off until a trial, sometimes even until an offer is made. And I think it's the understanding on the agency side, we are being trusted to send people who are fully vetted before sending people out. And a big part of that is speaking to references. And of course, there's always leeway and some flexibility with that. But being prepared to have those 2 to 3 references that can be contacted before a trial is offered, definitely before an offer is made. You're going into people's private homes. There's children. There's valuable personal information in the home. I think that it's important for candidates to understand the position that the recruiters are being put in. We're meeting you. A lot of times it's over FaceTime or Zoom, depending on location. That's why now we are pushing to try and meet people in person. I have offices in New York and Florida. Those are my biggest markets. Of course, we place all over the US and sometimes international. So we are aware that we can't meet everyone in person, and that's not the expectation. But we do think if we are in your location and you are there, meeting in person just offers that other extra step of the vetting process. And it also works really well because we could meet like this on FaceTime. I think you're great. And then in a week or two, there's new jobs coming in and you come and you meet with us. And there's just something that stands out to me about this candidate coming and making their way to meet with us, where I'll get on the phone with my clients and say, you have to meet Maria. She just came to my office. She was so lovely. She brought this. It just adds this personal touch of the human part, which before, when I first started in the industry 16 years ago in New York, I was never allowed to send out any candidate had not one of us in the office met with them in person. It was a requirement. And I think COVID did change that. It also opened up the recruiting world because now we are able to place people in Texas and California, overseas without meeting people in person. So that expectation has left a bit, but coming from a background where that was a must, I'm trying to keep that. And again, we try and do it with our clients too. It's not just on the candidate side. If I go to a client's home or family office and I get to meet the other staff that's there, the other people that there, it just makes my matchmaking skill a bit better. And it's also better for me to be able to tell my candidates, I met so-and-so in person. This is what the home was like. This is how many staff there is. This is what the expectation is. There were people wearing uniforms. So just being able to give that personal detail on both sides, I think is important. And going back to the reference side, I think if it's a colleague or a manager, it doesn't always have to be the client. You know, we understand that a lot of these clients, they won't even get on the phone with another client. You know, they're high profile, you know, they're traveling, but being able to have those 2 or 3 references ready to go when you're interviewing, especially with agencies, just always know that's going to be the expectation, and just be ready to explain this is why they can't be called, or if they can be held off, but I have my direct manager. And of course that counts too. It's just being able to speak to someone to verify what that person did, how long they were there, and especially how they worked on the private side in a home with colleagues.
Mm-hmm. There's just something about like actually meeting somebody in person or shaking their hand and like seeing their entire body language, which is a large chunk of like, hey, how will this person be inside somebody's home? Like maybe they have very awkward body language or signals, or there's something about them. Or maybe on the flip side, they could be like very pleasant in appearance and how they speak, and easy to be around and easy to have a conversation, but also not too talkative, you know, all of those nuances that you can, I think, gauge when you meet somebody over a cup of coffee.
Exactly. And also for the candidate, right? We're asking for very personal information. We're asking for your IDs, sometimes your social security, your birth certificate. We're asking to speak to these employers. So I think it also adds, you know, a sense of safety to our candidates, you know. And like you said, even meeting like this on video, you know, some people are awkward on video. You know, I feel like I'm better in person than on video. And I have a lot of candidates too who will say, oh, well, the client just meet me in person instead of a FaceTime or Zoom. I'm just better in person. So I think, again, you could like someone on Zoom and be like, wow, they're great. They had a great personality, or they were very positive. But then, like you said, when you meet them in person, you shake your hand, you know, you have that eye contact, and you get a feel for their demeanor, you know, even just showing up on time or bringing the things that you asked for. So I do think it makes a huge difference to meet people in person.
So what do you think is the ratio of applications per open position when it comes to chef roles right now?
High. There's so many people, and not just chef roles. I think right now there are so many people without work, and that's where it's gotten difficult. Even like as a boutique agency, you know, it's myself and Amanda that I have in Florida full time. Even just answering emails with resumes. You know, I'll post a position, and I can have anywhere from 5 if it's, you know, somewhere where I don't have candidates, to over 100 applications per job post. And with chefs, I think too. You know, I think definitely one of the positions where if we post a job, we just get so many resumes for the chef postings.
Why do you think that shifted so much? Because I remember like 2 years ago, it was not quite the same. And it felt like it was more of a chef's market, like people that were looking for jobs had a little bit of a choice. And now I feel like that kind of flipped.
Yeah, and I think COVID changed a lot of that. You know, I think a lot of people were without work or have stayed without work, a lot of restaurant closings. I do think that chefs is one of the positions where people also stayed longer term. Where, for example, nannies, I think there's a lot of turnaround in nannies, and not for any bad reason. It could just be the ages or the stages that the children are in. I think with chefs, they sort of grow into the role. They grow with a growing family. So there's not so much turnaround with chefs. So they tend to stay in the positions longer. And I see that a lot with resumes. You know, I think with chef resumes, you have that 5 to 10 years per family, where, you know, maybe with nannies or even housekeepers, it's 2-3 years is sort of that turnaround, maybe 5. But you don't see those 10 to 15 years with one family. And I think with private chefs, I see that long term a lot more.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've interviewed somebody here, Veronica Eichen, and she's almost 20 years with the same families.
Okay, which is amazing. I mean, those are the best candidates to present, because here's that one reference, or maybe there was one from years ago, and just that longevity is amazing. But hard to come across. I think 20 years is definitely rare.
Yeah, that was very outstanding. Like, and it's very rare. And sometimes I also think I saw one resume just this week where somebody spent 6 years with one family, but then he had like 1 year, and then the families afterwards weren't quite the same match. But I think because he was already very long with one, he knew what he wanted.
Yeah.
He felt like the families afterwards weren't quite that.
Yeah, and you never know what the families are asking for. You know, sometimes they'll say, we don't want someone that's been 20 years with one family, because then they're stuck in their ways or stuck in how they do things. And not just for chefs, for estate managers, for house managers, where sometimes people will say, we want that 2 to 3 years experience or 5 years max. And that way, it's someone who will adapt to the way we like things done or are more flexible. And again, not totally set in their ways.
Yeah, that I can see that. Imagine you, especially maybe if it's elderly couple, let's say you work 20 years with an elderly couple and they have their routine, which is super set, and you just cater to that for 20 years. And then you maybe come to a younger family that has kids and that has more going on and they want to explore different diets and things. And you will feel like you landed in a completely different world.
Right. Or even the travel expectation or moving around with the family. So, a lot of these clients, when they come to us and they tell us, this is what the job is, we want someone who's done exactly this or has been in this type of household. And that could mean exactly a family with young kids, with pets, with extended family coming in and out. Like you mentioned, maybe spending the summers in the Hamptons and entertaining a lot or working with other chefs. So there's always sort of a standard of what our clients are looking for. And then, that's our job to match these candidates with what the clients are looking for, and vice versa, right? A candidate can say to us, I only want to work with one person or a household with no children, no pets, no travel. So it is a lot of trying to match, both sides of what people are looking for.
Mm-hmm. So kind of taking it back a little bit, where do you think a chef can put his best foot forward first approaching you, and that starts with the first engagement, maybe I'm contacting you on LinkedIn, maybe I'm replying to one of your posts, and how would you ideally want that to happen so that you think somebody is sincere, somebody knows what they're getting into, they definitely looked and read through the details? What gives you that sense that somebody is sincere and actually went the extra mile by reading everything and maybe even putting their resume forth in a certain way?
Yeah. And, that's a tough question to answer because I don't want to say that I won't look at a resume if we don't have an open position. I get contacted all the time where someone will email me and say, your name came up in conversation, or I saw one of your posts. I wanted to have my resume with the agency. And we're always happy to save those, and we'll get back to them and say, or we try to, right? Thank you for sending your resume. We'll let you know if something comes up. Or, I always tell people, follow my company Instagram page. I post every job on there. And even if it is a confidential search, 9 out of 10 times our clients will say we can put one line like, private chef needed Upper West Side, contact us for more information. But I think initially just sending an email with your resume, with just a quick opening, looking for private chef work in New York City. Or like you said, if it's someone who hasn't worked privately and is coming from a restaurant background, maybe pointing that out. I have 15 years in restaurants, but I've done catering or some private parties, or just to give us a sense of, okay, they've had some private home experience. Because again, if they're going through the agency, unfortunately, by the time a client gets to the agency, it's because they know exactly what they want and what they're looking for as far as having that private service experience. But that being said, I just placed a chef in Miami with one of my colleagues who came from a restaurant. Maybe he had done some catering experience, but never worked as a private chef per se with one family. And we made a very successful placement, both parties. He's been there 8 months now, and it's been an amazing match. So there is a way to do it without having that experience. But it is, like you said, just reading those job posts. It'll say, hospitality background, welcome to apply, or 5-star Michelin restaurant experience, a plus. So we'll add that so that candidates know you can apply, even if you don't have the exact 5 years experience. But in general, again, by the time the clients are coming to the agency side, it's because they want that home private experience.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a personality difference sometimes, right? It's people that thrive in a commercial setup might be slightly different from the personality that thrives inside a home, where it's time to bite your tongue occasionally, and you kind of have to know when to talk, when not to talk, and when to engage, when not to engage.
And I think being okay with ever-changing schedules, taste, diets, right? I think I've never worked as a chef, and I can barely cook, so I don't know, what that's like. But I think it's also, I was a teacher right out of college, so I worked in a classroom setting, not the same, maybe comparison, but moving to New York, I started working in recruiting, but I also did tutoring, having the background in education. babysitting even, and that was something I didn't do growing up. I always worked with children. I worked at after school care, camp counselor. Again, I was a teacher for 6 years for the public school system in Miami, but then being thrown into a household and, there was a chef, there was another nanny, there was a housekeeper, the parents were there watching everything that you're doing with the child. To me, that was, and again, I wasn't even nannying, I was tutoring. And still that was really different from coming from a classroom where I'm doing exactly the same thing. I have my lesson plans. It's me and the children, and then adding all these different personalities into the private side. Definitely different, and I think, like what you said, coming from working in a kitchen or a corporate environment into a household, there's just so many other things that are constantly moving and constantly changing. So having that personality that you can roll with things and be okay with constructive criticism, or, saying the food needs this, or this week I've decided I don't want to eat this anymore, and now this is my new diet. So yes, I think that flexibility part of personality is huge in working in the private side.
I think this is quite a challenge for chefs. It's like literally being told to cook the opposite of last week every other week. I'm like, oh, now I want the broccoli boiled, then I want it steamed, then I want it fried, and I'm like, okay. And you just have to like friendly roll with it and be like, okay, you
Right.
literally just told me to do the other thing last week.
Yeah, one of the things we get a lot too is, especially in a household with children, right? You're cooking almost 5 different things for one meal because they all have their likes and dislikes. So it's not just one menu. Sometimes you're doing up to 5 menus for just one sitting. So
that's actually pretty common. I think in a world, or like in their bubble of the world, it's very common for everybody to get what they want. And once they have a private chef, or if they're already used to having a private chef, they just want that to continue, where like, hey, these kids like that, and then maybe John likes this and Mary likes this. And that's why, and then the chef is like, okay, I'm literally cooking 5 different dishes here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that is very common. And I think, again, when speaking to chefs in particular who want to transition into the household, it's making sure that you are going to be okay with that dynamic and, knowing what to expect. And like you said, there isn't really trainings for this. People sort of fall into the private service industry a lot of times by accident, or a need, or just word of mouth. And then you just learn as you go. And there really isn't a manual per se as to, hey, this is what it's going to be like. And I think, it is important, like you said, to have a podcast like this and share your own personal experience of, this is how I transitioned. This is what happened to me. These were my experiences. And that sort of sets the expectation for, future chefs who are thinking about, and there are so many positive things about working on the private side, right? Compared to working in a restaurant. Just like with teachers, there's such a plus side of being a nanny instead of, working in a classroom with 30 children. And, again, growing up in Miami, I went to college in Miami, again, kind of fell into teaching. It's what I enjoyed doing at the time. I had no idea that nannying was a career or even a choice of a career until I moved to New York and started working in recruiting. And I remember my first agency, I would tell my boss, these nanny jobs would come in and they were paying 5 times what I made as a public school teacher. And, they would say college degree, speaking a second language. And I'd be like, can I apply for that position? And I just didn't know that it was a career. And it's not something that, at least where I was, that was not taught. Where I think now, especially again with COVID, things really changed and people wanted to hire private chefs. And there were chefs without work, coming from the restaurant side. And there was a big need for people in private service. So that opportunity really presented itself where teachers got to try out, teaching at home or privately, and chefs got to, work privately for families. So I think it opened the door to a lot of people wanting to work in the industry.
Do you feel overall, and this is a tough question, I know I've tried to kind of size this before, do you think the market with private chef positions as such is growing in overall size? Or
yeah, that is a tough question to ask, because I feel, and I'm not a specific just chef agencies, right?
Yep.
There are agencies who only do chefs, so they might answer this question differently. I think chefs and drivers are probably the jobs that come in the least. And I've always thought it's because of the longevity of people who stay in those roles. So no, I don't think there's a ton of opportunities. There's not, those jobs don't come in every day. They come in phases. I think like right now we have 3 open chef jobs that are New York City based, and that's a lot to have for me at one time for chefs. Also summer's coming, so that probably is when more chef opportunities tend to come in. But compared to the other household roles that we fill, no, I think chefs they don't come in as often.
I mean, but if I think about, let's say I get into affluence, probably the first thing I would like to have is maybe help in the household, like the basics. So that would be a housekeeper role. And then if I think about it, maybe if I'm a busy executive, I want a personal assistant before I want a chef at home. So, and then I think before I want a driver, I probably want a chef.
Same.
If I think about the kind of the sequence of how I would add to those.
Yeah, and I think before people try hiring a driver or a chef, and again, I know this depends on a lot of things, but there are so many services for food, right? I mean, whether it's just getting on Uber or Uber Eats or Dash, or even these meals that come and you really just throw a couple things together, heat it up, and they're ready. Especially people on specific diets. And the same thing with drivers. There's so many car services, taxis, that those two are probably the ones that people think, okay, I'll get to that eventually.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the personality traits that you think make a good person inside a home, whether it's a tutor or nanny? Like what do you think are the non-negotiables around a personality that need to be there in a home?
I think flexibility is probably one of the key things. You're being thrown into someone's household where it's not an office. There's really nothing routine about the way a home runs. So someone who's just willing to go with things, happy to help with things that might not be in their job description, but if the parents are willing to do it, I think the person in the home should be happy to help with those things. Obviously not daily. If you're a nanny and they're asking you to do deep cleaning, different thing, or if you're a chef and they're asking you to drive the children. But I think just being a team player and happy to help with anything is probably the key personality trait. And of course, like any job, right? I think you have to be nice, you have to be respectful, and just be able to get along with multiple personalities, because you never know who's going to come into that household, who is going to be the new hire. And just keeping it professional, because I think a lot of lines are crossed when you work in private service, whether it's with the client or with your colleagues, and you want to like the people, that just like in an office setting, you want to have a friendly dynamic. But I think in a home, it's almost harder to keep that professional separation. So I think those things are important to have when considering working on the private side.
Once one of the principals actually said, and it was about the tonality she was using towards me, and I said that she can't speak to me that way. And she said, I'm in my home, I'll speak whichever way I want. I'm like, yes, but this is a professional work relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is something that we stress every day to our clients and candidates. And it goes both ways, right? Like sometimes candidates will say, well, I want to be paid cash. I want to be paid half on, half off. That is not a professional environment. You want to be treated corporate and professional. We have to do it across the line, and even with our clients, they'll interview people and ask things that we legally cannot ask, and they should not be asking, but it's the same thing. It's almost like the laws don't apply to me because you're in my home and I'm asking these questions. So it is a lot of educating both our clients and candidates, like, even though it is very personal and you're working out of people's homes, keeping it with that corporate mentality. And that's why it's important to have contracts in place, what your overtime is, what your days off are, what your holidays are, and having these contracts to make sure that everyone knows, while again, you're working in someone's home and the lines can get crossed a little bit because it may become a bit more casual, just naturally, making sure to always remember that, that you want to be treated professionally, and vice versa with our clients, with our candidates. Like you said, you can't just yell because I'm in your home. There has to be a level of respect for both parties.
Yeah. Do you think that some of the principals are not even aware of what they're not allowed to ask, or they ask regardless?
There's probably a mix of both, and I think sometimes people don't know and they're new to it. I think it really depends on the client, right? There's clients who have been hiring staff all their lives, grew up with staff in the home. And then there's new wealth or new people that are coming into, this is my first time hiring someone. I don't even know, how do I put someone on payroll? Do they get overtime? What are the state laws? So there is a lot of educating on both sides. And even with our clients, we do have to send them, the information or tell them this is what the law is in New York or, so sometimes I think it is innocent. And sometimes even when you're just interviewing, and when I interview people too, a lot of times I know that there's questions I have to go through in order to be able to present my candidates, but it definitely does tend to become more of a conversation. And sometimes...
Sorry for the interruption. We will be right back. And if you're a chef thinking about venturing into the private chef space, this is for you. We coach you on how to set yourself up for success, from resume to first interactions with your clients, as well as succeeding at the job. Our one-on-one coaching got you covered. Go to www.privatechef.cc and connect with me. Decades of experience can be your support to seize the next private chef opportunity.
That kind of loosens up the questions that people ask, or even the information that people share with you, because it does turn into more of a conversation.
So what are some of the things that technically, like, the candidates shouldn't be revealing? Like, what are some of the things that you can't ask a candidate?
Yeah, and you can reveal whatever you'd like. There's no law, and you can talk as the candidate, you can share, but, asking your age, your religion, your race, if you have children, your marital status. I mean, those are questions that shouldn't be asked. Where are you from? As far as, questions like that should not be asked. And I think during COVID, again, all of these lines got crossed, and a lot of the reasons...
I was just thinking back to some of the interviews. I was like, I think I've been asked pretty much all of those.
I mean, we got the craziest questions where it was like, I would take notes every time I was meeting people of, I need to add this to things that can and can't be said, and a lot of times it was for safety reasons. I think during COVID, people were asking, how many people are in your household? How many people do you interact? Who comes in and out of your house? What does your husband do for work? Where do your kids, so it was a lot of personal questions. Like, do you go out? Where do you go out? How often? And again, that was, I think, not innocently, but sometimes it really was because of the fear. It wasn't coming from a bad place. Or clients would ask us, can you ask if they're married? How many people live in? I said, as an agency, we can ask those questions. If it comes up in conversation while you're interviewing the person, they can share what they're comfortable sharing with you. And part of the trainings that we do on the agency side, we actually did an Instagram live about this a few weeks ago. It was how to navigate difficult questions that are asked during the interview process. Sometimes a mom will ask a nanny, well, do you have kids? How old are your kids? And if you don't want to answer that question for whatever reason, it is saying, are you asking because of the travel? Yes, I can spend the summer in the Hamptons. I have family that helps me with anything that's needed. That's just one example of a question a lot of nannies get, is the children part, So there's ways that we try and help our candidates navigate those uncomfortable questions that probably shouldn't be asked during an interview.
Do you think they're being asked whether they have kids because it restricts their availability and flexibility?
Yes, I think that's typically what it is. And also some moms will say to us, well, if they have a toddler at home, I don't want to take away their time with their kids because I need them to work late night, and I would feel guilty having someone stay overnight and I know their child is waiting for them at home. So sometimes I don't think it comes from a bad place either. I think it is concern of, or, our job description requires traveling for a month. Are they okay leaving their own child? And what they don't understand is a lot of times people do have families or husbands or siblings who live with them or are neighbors, and they're comfortable doing that. And some people I think that makes them nervous that, that might become an issue down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's generally part of, like, what creates longevity. It's really like, hey, can we paint a reasonable picture of what can be expected on both sides? And if you're actually fine with being away for a month, and then we're only being away for a month instead of 3 or 4 months, then I think that's where longevity can be created. But for that, both parties actually need to be truthful with each other and cannot paint a rosy picture.
Yeah, and I think that comes with that salary expectation too, right? Like you said, if they're offering you $250,000 a year, but it requires 2 or 3 months out on a yacht, and then maybe another month traveling to the Hamptons, or 2 months, the expectation is that when we're interviewing candidates, I always ask, I don't ask, do you have kids or what is your marital status? This is what this client is looking for, and they want longevity. Like, are you okay every summer spending 3 months out in the Hamptons? Being able to go back on your days off, of course, or, they travel internationally where you wouldn't be able to fly back and forth. So I think it is being just very honest with your recruiter too, right? This is my lifestyle. This is what my expectation is. This is what I can offer clients. And then that's where it's our job to try and match you with the right client that, and there are jobs where it's just city-based, it's 5 days a week, maybe they need flexibility for weekends or a random week to the Hamptons. But again, if it's going to be all summer, you do have to be realistic. Like, is this something that I can sustain for years? Because that's what this client is looking for, is a long-term fit.
Yeah. And then it needs to be a realistic match. But sometimes I've also had families where initially they told me, oh, it's limited travel and we are we're very predictable. We already know month ahead. And then when I actually spoke to the assistant after I was hired, it turned out that they do a lot of like impromptu things, and it is not as it was projected. And then you feel a little bit bummed, but you already, signed up for the position.
Yeah. And that happens. And I think, it's a hard thing to navigate, right? A lot of times when we're taking on clients, a lot of times we don't get to speak to the actual client. Like you said, we're speaking to the assistant, the family office. And until you're in that role, there's really no way of knowing, what is expected. We can only gather all the information. We get the job description, we get the contract. So we're hoping that all of that is included. But yeah, I think it's keeping that in mind. Again, working on the private side, that flexibility is key, and you don't have to do it, right? If they said it was one way and another, then it's not the position for you. Of course, you can part ways. But I think during the trial, during the interview process, especially if you have limitations on travel or you don't want to, you've done it too much and this is what you're looking for, it's making that really clear, not just to your recruiter, because if you're interviewing on your own, throughout that interview process is just reiterating, like, just want to confirm this is what the travel or the overnight expectation is. This is what I can offer you. And just being as clear and honest as possible, I think is, and that way the client too will feel comfortable. Like, we really want to hire him. If he's saying 4 weeks a year is all he can do, let's make sure that we stick to that. So I think just having that communication is really important.
Yeah. And earlier you mentioned something about like, if the salary is of a certain capacity, like usually if a chef role crosses to 200,000, there is a different expectation on availability. Like, and that's definitely something that I noticed. Like, as I was progressing in kind of the salary range, there was also the expectation of availability went up and up. Like, there was less so of maybe a consent that, whether it's around the holidays or something, it's like by us giving you a higher salary, our family becomes a priority over maybe your personal family holidays or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think it's keeping that in mind when you're applying. Like, of course, when you see these large salaries, how exciting, yes, I want this job. But knowing exactly what does that mean? And that's reading the fine print and really understanding, like you said, what is the flexibility that comes with this salary? And not just for chef jobs, with, nannies, with housekeepers, with butlers, estate managers, the weekend necessity, right? If they need you on the weekends, the salaries tend to be higher, but the expectation is that you work every single weekend, so while we all are looking for, of course, the highest salary possible, we all want that, it is making sure that that lifestyle matches what they're offering and that you're willing to give that up, or maybe you're in a time in your life where you do have all that flexibility. So, that is exciting, or you want to travel and have that experience, it's wonderful. But if you're more settled or like you said, have done this for so long and now you're ready to sort of have more of a work-life balance, the expectation of the salary is not going to be up there for those kind of roles.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is where it helps to have clarity. And maybe this is something where you can actually help candidates when they come and approach you and you hear them describing what they want. Obviously, everybody wants the highest possible salary. But then you're also reading between the lines. You're like, I think like you actually looking more for a little bit maybe stability and being closer to your family, and you don't want that much travel. So maybe the particular job that you applied for is not quite for you. It's maybe for somebody younger with less commitments in their personal life. And
Yeah, and I think it's a hard thing to get across, because I think there's a lot of groups where people will say, well, I know someone who's making $50 an hour and I'm making 35 an hour, and there's two kids and they have one child. Or, a housekeeper, it could be any position. And it's like, well, did you ask them, what is their schedule? How often are they traveling? What do they work weekends? Are they on call? With personal assistants, especially, that happens a lot too, right? Where the salaries range so much. Like, there really is no standard at this point. But if you're on call 24/7, the expectation is that you're living with your phone next to you, and at any moment, those salaries are going to be higher. Where if it's a Monday to Friday 9 to 5, with, of course, I mean, we're all attached to our phones, so there's always some email and things like that. Those salaries tend to be lower because the expectation of availability is lower. Yeah, the salary thing is a constant topic of conversation, because there is also no standard in some sense. I mean, there's a minimum standard, but a lot of times it's, I've been making X amount and that's what I want to make, whether you have 2 or 3 years experience or you have 20 years experience. I've seen candidates with 20 years experience and then someone with 4 years experience, and they're making less than the person with 4 years. And it really is just because of an opportunity that they got. And now that is where they're interviewing at, and only want to interview at that number.
Mm-hmm. That's a tough one to read. Just like, if you get lucky and you get like $180,000 role,
yeah,
but it's not actually where the market would ever place you again.
Right.
And then you really have to go through that reckoning and be like, okay, I just spent 1 year interviewing. Nobody's willing to match me. Maybe my market value isn't actually at 180.
Yeah. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes it does take time to realize that, or the harsh reality of, maybe I was overpaid, and maybe you weren't. Maybe it was just what your job description was. And then now the rules that are available don't require all of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily overpaid, because sometimes we could add value to one particular household, and it's actually that valuable to them that they're willing to pay 180. And that could be because of a skill that's completely unrelated to me in the kitchen, or maybe I'm really good at giving them the feeling of being safe and trustworthy, and I can help them facilitate things, and that gives them that additional benefit. But the next family actually just wants me to cook for them. And they don't care for anything else that I was able to provide to the other principal. And therefore they are looking at it more from like, well, we can get another great chef at 140.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times too, it's combination roles, where you were the chef, but then you also ended up doing house management. And then they had you doing more than just the chef work. And then again, you were at one salary because of all that responsibility that came with it. And then, like you said, another family's like, I just want you to come 3 days a week, prepare the meals for the week, and then that's it. So yeah, it really does depend on the families, the position, and the expectations.
Mm-hmm. This is where I always make a point of, I want chefs to, before they leave a position, ideally, build a cushion, because that allows them to actually gain clarity in the new process of finding another family, because it's not a fast process usually. No. It's like, and like the chances that the ideal family is available and looking when you're looking for a new job are very slim. Yeah. So sometimes that might really be a window that we need, and then we need to be flexible, and we need to have a little bit of reserves to go into that with.
Yeah, definitely. I think applying for private service positions is such a process, from meeting with agencies, sometimes a handful or a dozen of them, to then, doing your initial interview with the family office, the assistant, the house manager, until the principal, then the trial. And then a lot of times these background checks that our clients do are extensive and could take weeks for them to complete. So it's definitely a lengthy process from the interview to getting hired. So
this is something where I have to remind chefs that sometimes reach out to me like, hey, I need a job. Like, actually, I needed it yesterday. I'm out of money. I'm like, it's not how private service works. Like, you need to somehow be able to cover your cost, whether you keep working somewhere else but this is a lengthy process. Like, you can't just like quit your job and hope that you're going to be placed anywhere soon.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's definitely a very lengthy process, a very frustrating process, and I think it's also a personality process, because you can check all the boxes of what a client is looking for, but there might be 3 other candidates that also have all those qualifications. And at the end, the only feedback they'll give us is, oh, is this a better personality match? So that's something that you can't really coach people for, or even give feedback for, because that's really the only feedback that was given to us.
Touching up on coaching, you've also started something called the Agency League. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, of course. So my colleagues, Elisa with Innovative Youth Care and Rosalie with Legacy Staffing, we've been working together for almost 10 years. And when I say working together, we've been helping each other with clients, candidates. We just work very well together. And we just kept seeing a need for the education part of what we do. And when I first started in the industry, there was, DEMA and other organizations that were wonderful, because it gave candidates a reason to all get together and feel like we had colleagues and partners in what we were doing, and they provided trainings. And so our thought was, we meet so many candidates, which was a question you had asked me about how many resumes we get per job posting. And more than half of these candidates, we're not going to be able to place them because we don't have that many jobs. So we wanted to create a network for education, for trainings, for events, even for a social aspect, because a lot of people, when you work in private service, you are very lonely. You are very alone. You might have one colleague in the family, but being able to talk to other people that do what you do. So our platform is going to be a member base. We are also going to offer free trainings. We just started it this year. I think we're doing our 6th training, June 9th in New York. They're in-person trainings. We did everything from the interview, the resume writing, the trial, navigating everything from a trial to the actual hire and contracts. And then we're doing a wellness one is our last training. And then starting next month, we are going to do paid trainings where we're going to have executive housekeepers come in to train, laundresses, butlers, newborn care specialists to talk about how to break into NCS. We'll probably have chefs come and talk about breaking in from the corporate world into the private world. And again, it really is just going to be a platform where we're going to provide people templates. Like, let's say you interviewed for a job on your own that you found on LinkedIn, let's say, and you have no idea where to get started. What questions should I be asking the clients? What should be in my contract? What are the new laws in, let's say, New York on overtime or travel rates or overnight rates? So that's called the Agency League. We do have our website up. We have our Instagram. It's just the Agency League. You can follow us on there. And our next training in person will be June 9th in New York. And then, like I mentioned to you, in September, we're going to do all those free trainings that we did in New York in Miami. And we'll be announcing that within the next couple of weeks. And it will be a training going through everything that we've done in New York and Florida.
Nice.
Yeah.
Basically, after the New York season, September, we're coming back to the Southern season.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice. This is so cool, so that people actually have a touch point and like, hey, even if I'm not quite there yet to get into that position, this is how I can prepare myself, upskill myself, learn the lingo that actually eventually gets me that. And I think this really helps is being intentional. Like, even if it takes 48 months, which is a lot, 4 years of preparation, it's still worthwhile for many chefs. Like, if I think about the average salary in a restaurant for a line cook or a sous chef compared to what they could potentially, given their skill set, earn in a private home and what that means for their family, I think it's very worthwhile to be intentional around that.
Yeah. No, and I think too, just, again, touching on like the networking part of it, if you are a chef and you've never worked in a private home and you start networking with private chefs or with estate managers or even nannies where they say, oh, my boss mentioned she's having a birthday party, and they're not going to go through an agency for a one-day chef. They might, but typically they don't. So It is a nice way to meet people who work in private service and start getting those one-off positions to be able to add that to your resume.
Yeah. And this just builds up, like start having those one-offs, then maybe out of those one-offs, you get a summer in the Hamptons. Now you can really point towards something. You actually have a reference that is based on a family and not on a commercial environment. And that slowly kind of builds the trust for a new family to potentially hire you full time.
Yeah. And a lot of it is word of mouth, right? Again, I know agencies exist and, we're here a lot of times for like these big family offices that want us to go through all the vetting process. But a lot of times it's normal families who just say, I just need a chef for the summer. My kids are going to be here. My grandkids are going to be here. And a lot of it is word of mouth. I mean, I would say most of the candidates that I meet, their past positions tend to be word of mouth referrals. And it doesn't matter if they're a nanny or a chef or a butler. I think a lot of people organically get these positions because of networking, because of these one-offs. And that was sort of their foot in the door with one family. And then they were referred to another.
Yeah, it's true. But you have to start putting yourself out there, have to be networking, have to get to know people.
Yeah. And I think, again, our whole reason for starting this platform of the Agency League is we meet so many people and we understand how frustrating the process is. I meet so many wonderful people who might not have the years of experience, might not have the language requirements. Sometimes they ask for education requirements, but I know that they could work for a family and be an amazing candidate. So we want to be able to say, well, we might not be able to place you now. Here are all the tools that we can provide you with to try and get these jobs on your own.
I love that. And I think it also shows how much you guys care towards the candidates, because there are a couple agencies in the early stage that I dealt with who I didn't feel take care of their candidates in that way. That they were just like throwing candidates at the principals and like see who sticks. And then if they feel like you're the golden goose, they'll entertain you. And otherwise you're just gone out of their spectrum. And I feel like with something like the Agency League, you're like, hey, we kind of have a feeling of why you're not yet ready, but here's a set of tools and different courses and events and networking possibilities where you can upskill yourself to get there. And I think that just shows that you guys care.
Yeah, and I've worked in different agencies before I went off on my own. So I've seen a little bit of everything behind the scenes, from working in bigger agencies to the mentality of like, let's see what sticks, to the hand holding. And I came from a background, my first agency was amazing. I worked with wonderful people that I'm still friends with. We still work together. We still help each other. Most of them have started their own agencies. And I think that's what I enjoyed about it. I didn't look at this as this is a sales job, which it is in a sense, because recruitment is sales in a sense, but it's not about the sales. It really is about the placement. Like, we're really helping people find jobs and we're helping clients have the support that they need. So it really does take the two. It's not all about the client. It's not all about the candidate. And unfortunately, I do think agencies get a bad reputation sometimes, and it's not always their fault. I think it is the extreme pressure of, I have 100 resumes, and if I don't reply to one person, that person is going to get upset with me and talk bad about the agency. Or they interviewed with one of my clients and my client just didn't give me feedback, and now they're upset with us. Or they've interviewed with us and gone through the whole process, and I still haven't been able to secure an interview with them. And that turns into anger. And I understand it, because it's very frustrating to go through this process and not have any results. So again, I think that's why having the Agency League is really important, because I want to help you. I'm just one person, so I can't possibly help everyone I'm speaking to. So yeah, I'm excited about it. And I think having a place for people to come who want to even just learn a little bit more about the industry.
Yeah. Well, Carmen, this has been super lovely. Thank you so much for making the time and introducing us to the Agency League as well as Hudson Staffing. Where can people connect with you, whether it's Instagram or your website? What's the best channel to reach out to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think to connect with us online, Instagram, it's Hudson_staffing. And then through email, which is just Carmen@HudsonStaff.com. And that will have all our information, our website, how to apply. But I think connecting with us on Instagram is probably the easiest way. All our information is on there. All our jobs are posted on there. And then you can connect to everything else through there. We'll post all our events and upcoming trainings on there too.
Thank you for joining us at the Private Chef podcast. If you know any highly skilled chefs that want to take their life to the next level, make sure to share this podcast with them. And if you enjoyed this episode, click subscribe and check out our upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening.